Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Mark Worster and I'm the founder of the New Mysteries. I have the honor and the pleasure to be here today with my good friend, someone I consider a mentor actually, Jacques Theron. Jacques, welcome today. We're here to have a discussion about the mysteries. And there's so much to talk about.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for inviting me, and it's wonderful to have this very important conversation about the mysteries.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I guess in our society, we always want to know everything there is to know about everything, right? And it's very in this scientific world that we live in, and we want to make sure we know all the things before we decide to believe in something. And we're going to talk about something today that is mysterious, because the fact is we don't know exactly what happened in this particular ceremony, in these ceremonies that happened for what? A period of 1,500 years?
At least.
In human history, and yet we don't know that much about it. We have clues, we have some ideas, but we'll get into it. So I'll let you roll, Jacques.
So to your point, it was at least 1,500 years that the mysteries were a formalized part of certainly the ancient Greek world. No question that they were also part of the ancient Egyptian civilization. But apart from the fact that emperors like the Emperor Julian of Rome and the Emperor Hadrian of Rome and Socrates participated in the mysteries of Eleusis, so very high profile figures in the ancient world were participating and having profound experiences. But then, of course, you've got the initiation cult temple of the city of Eleusis, which is right next to Athens, where they had an enormous structure, the Telesterion, which was a large hall where yearly these people would have an initiation practice. And first of all, they were sworn to secrecy, so we don't know exactly what happened. But those mysteries were considered so sacred, and that oath of silence was so binding that we don't really know what happened exactly. But of course, we can surmise what happened. And one of the central sacraments was the kykion, drink, which some people, like the researcher Wasson, in his book, The Road to Eleusis, says was a fungus, mushroom, ergot that basically had the same effects as LSD. So there were certain preparations, certain rites that took place, but it was that kykion that gave such a profound experience of the goddess Demeter, of the goddess Persephone, of the experience of rebirth through Hades, that it transformed people's lives, emperors' lives, philosophers' lives, to the extent that they were in such reverence that they remained secretive about what happened.
Yeah, that was, I think, my entry point into really looking at the mysteries was that book, The Road to Eleusis. And I remember in that book, the Telestron, it struck me as incredible. And I think the number was actually 3,000. They could fit 3,000 people in this elaborate, long ceremony. And I think I'd love to dive into sort of like what we think the ceremony was, like what was that? And you mentioned death and rebirth, and so that allegory, that metaphor. But imagine 3,000 people sitting in this, what was life-changing, orchestrated event that went on for 1,500 years. And another thing that was mentioned that really was incredible to me, especially for the time, was that anyone could become an initiate. Free man, slave, emperor, they would all enter wearing white. They were completely devoid of whatever social structure that was in place, right? You could be the emperor of Rome, or you could be a slave, but you could be there. The only requirement, or the only thing that you couldn't sit as if you had blood on your hands if you had killed someone, right?
Right.
So that was
Right.
one rule that they had. And I thought that was amazing that it was such an inclusive experience. And I think that's probably why it continued on for that length of time. It was just because it was inclusive of everyone in society. Right. Yeah.
I mean, that's a really good point. But another interesting fact is that conventional ancient Greek and Roman religion very much had a hierarchy between the gods, who were immortal, and humans, who were mortal. And, in the Orthodox, let's say, religion, when you died, you went to Hades, and you were kind of a shade in Hades. What was very popular in the ancient world, but it wasn't really part of the orthodoxy, was the mysteries. The mysteries were the bridge between the gods and the mortals. So through the mysteries, through the act of rebirth, mortals could also become a little bit more divine. They could go a little bit beyond being just a shade after death. So even in that, it was quite different to the conventional structure of society and religion of the time. And it's still very much on track with our topic, but what's also very interesting, I often wondered, why did Christianity become so popular? This kind of obscure mystery cult from the land of Canaan, why did that go to Rome and become the religion of the entire empire? And I think it was exactly for that reason that Christianity also originally worked with a life-changing sacrament, and that it also was open to all classes of people. And, Christianity, I believe, spread because they were also following some of the practices of the mysteries, but it was even more, let's say, inclusive. It wasn't necessarily bound to a particular place like Eleusis or Samothrace. It was actually very inclusive, and the groundswell of it was so powerful that it spread and became the religion of the empire.
Yeah, fascinating that it was able to uproot what had been in place forever. And there was some talk somewhere that I read recently that pinned a lot of the success of the Roman Empire, which lasted a long time for a civilization, and a particular civilization to last. They pinned it on the fact that the people had a very devout religious practice, and every home had a god or a goddess, and so there would be worship all the time. And they pinned a lot of the success of the longevity of that, society on the fact that they had this. And now Christianity comes along and uproots that, and they have this mystery theme as well, right?
Right.
It's the death and the rebirth. So it's Absolutely. A beautiful sort of flowing in of a 1,500-year tradition in one sort of religious context into this next beautiful one.
Exactly. The problem, of course, was that when Christianity became the state religion, they needed an orthodoxy, and they needed to create a new orthodoxy. And then that's when they decided which books would go into the Bible, and they had to create the church hierarchy. And that's obviously when the persecutions started, when it became the state religion. But before then, for probably, Christianity only kind of was really strictly imposed in about the year 380 by Theodosius. Before then, it kind of coexisted with the other religions. But then in 380, they started to be repressive. And I think it was actually a little bit after that the Eleusis sanctuary was also actually closed down. But in the beginning, for the first 300 years or so, it kind of coexisted.
So one of the things that I found really interesting in this interplay of Rome, which became, the epicenter of the Christian religion, and had been participating in the mysteries for all that time, is that during the reign of Marcus Aurelius, Eleusis had been sacked by the Goths. They had been overrun, the temple had been destroyed, and Marcus Aurelius had been so profoundly impacted by his sitting at the mysteries that he rebuilt it.
Yes.
And one of the stories was that there was an inner sanctum, this inner sanctum, little place within the Telestrion that held the most sacred items that were used during the ceremony, and only the two families that had run this mysteries at Eleusis for that 1500-year period were ever allowed in that inner sanctum to see anything. The only other person, Marcus Aurelius.
Oh wow!
Because he had reestablished it. He brought it back.
Yes.
And
yes.
And that really just hit me as how profound of an experience had the Emperor of Rome had to really want to go back and reestablish this thing.
Absolutely.
Profound, deep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he wasn't the only emperor. There were several emperors that had the experience and continued to patronize those very high-profile mysteries. I think we know about Eleusis because it was so high-profile, but there were definitely mystery practices, or there were definitely different centers of mystery practices all throughout the Roman Empire, and definitely maybe pre-Roman forms. Maybe the Greek form was kind of exported, because let's not forget the Greeks had colonies in south of France, in Spain, and so forth. So those practices did spread as well, and that's also what's very interesting, is that people somehow, the mysteries of Mithras, for example, were pretty much used by all the military, certainly the generals, but I think all soldiers had access to that secret society of Mithras as well, which also no doubt had similar processes of initiation. So I think it was very much part of the consciousness. Eleusis is kind of the jewel on the crown in terms of mystery experiences in that time. But I think also, which is a really interesting point to remember, is that mystery practices are absolutely based in shamanic practices, and shamanic practices of death to the old, rebirth into a little bit more of one's truth, and then having these divinities, these gods, that actually help us in this process of rebirth.
Yeah, the story that's associated with the mysteries is one that has always fascinated me. The story of Persephone and Demeter and Hades, and within that Greek mythology, and how that story rolled. And it really is just such a beautiful story of sort of the human experience of being a god, right? The mother and the daughter and the brother-in-law. It's just great. What would you tell us about that a little bit? Because I know you have such a deep knowledge of that particular, historical context of the mysteries.
Well, the goddess Demeter and Persephone are kind of the patroness goddesses of Eleusis itself. And, apart from the myth, which very briefly is that Persephone gets abducted by Hades. Demeter searches for her daughter. She goes into mourning. Eventually, she discovers that Persephone is in the underworld, and she then decides to, Demeter being the goddess of the grains, of agriculture, boycotts the world and basically says she's going to bring no harvests until her daughter is released. Hades makes the condition that as long as Persephone has not eaten anything during her time in the underworld, he will set her free. Unfortunately, she had a few grains of pomegranate, and therefore she had to stay in the underworld for part of the year. And the times that she did go back to the upper world was the times of growth and harvest. But what's interesting about that myth, however, especially, is that you've got the mother grain, the wheat. She drops her, the mother stalk or head of wheat drops grains to the earth. That grain, that seed is Persephone. That seed is then taken into the underworld, it's planted, and through its mystery, it's reborn as another grain. So it's really the story, the mystery of not only the seed and how it grows, but how that allows sustenance, and how that is a metaphor for our own rebirth. You know, all of us hold a seed within ourselves to become our greater potential. And we need to be abducted, we need to be put into the cold earth, the underworld journey, the death experience, in order to be reborn, in order to germinate. And that's what was so revolutionary in the ancient world, was again that possibility that we're all seeds, that we all have this potential. We just need to fall on fertile ground in order for our greater potential to be born.
Amazing. What an amazing story. It really is, from beginning to end.
Absolutely.
One of the other facets that was super interesting to me was the fact that, you know, you would apply to be an initiate at the beginning of the year, and then there was a process that you would follow over the course of the year. There were some lesser mysteries, some things, you know, sort of some milestones that you had to achieve before you got to this in the fall, which is pretty symbolic, right? It's the beginning of that death cycle. Exactly. You know, you would go to Eleusis, or wherever you happen to be, whatever this was, but at Eleusis, you would arrive, and then you would have this, you know, this process that you would follow to get to the actual celebration, the actual experience of the mysteries.
Absolutely.
What do we know much about what that beginning process was? I mean, there were a few clues.
I think there was some, a lot of it was around purification, preparation through purification. And I think it was also showing dedication in that early phase, so, you know, fasting and washing in the ocean and sacrificing. I mean, I guess they had to find ways to see that the candidates wouldn't flip out during the ceremony. You know, it's a little bit of a screening process.
Yeah, it's going to be a deep experience, and shoot, if you got 3,000 people, you want to make sure that they're rock solid.
Exactly.
You know, what I found really interesting, Jacques, was that, you know, these themes of having to go through an initiation, to having to go through some process to reach this point where you can experience this rebirth, is prevalent in, I guess, all the religions, but certainly Christianity, which arose at the same time, as you say, the mysteries was operating, took some of that, you know, in the initiation of Lent. Like, you go through Lent and you pay your penance and you get to the point of the rebirth, right? Where you're experiencing the Easter holiday.
Yes.
And so it's just fascinating to me to see that these themes keep popping through within different religious traditions as they're sort of grown together in the same time period. It's beautiful.
Yes. And I mean, let's not forget that in those times, people were very aware of the winter solstice, the summer solstice, the equinox, and Christmas falls on the winter solstice, the darkest time of the year, when that new light is reborn, and that seed then germinates so that the next season of harvest can come. So, you know, the ancients were not only obviously extremely aware of agriculture and the growing seasons, but they looked to the heavens to understand that, and they therefore understood their dual nature, or our dual nature as humans, you know, that we are from the heavens, but we are also of the earth. And the mystery initiations were a way for us, or for humans, to become more heavenly during our earthly experience.
Man, we have a lot of fertile ground to cover with these great stories, these things that the things that we do know.
Yes.
I think this is a great time. Maybe we'll wrap up after this because there's just so much. We want to just break this up into a couple of conversations. I think it's a great time to touch on the aspect of the mysteries. It was called that for a particular reason, right?
Yes. So the word mystes in Greek means initiate, or the mysteries related to the process of initiation. Of course, initiation into godliness, into the mysteries, into what was less knowable for the human. You know, certain areas of knowledge were knowable and others were less. So the mysteries was that process of initiation into a mystery, the mystery of self, the mystery of the gods. And yeah, it's, you know, there are many facets to the word as well, mystes, or the mysteries. And kind of in, let's say, the day-to-day world, that's exactly the opposite of how we function. You know, in the day-to-day world, we want to understand and explain everything, and we want there to be, let's say, a practical meaning to things, whereas the mysteries are not practical in a direct sense. They're practical in terms of our happiness and our well-being and our greater vision. So yes, that word in itself is just so, it's got so many facets.
Right. And still to this day, we have clues, we have sharing from different people who sat through the experience that talked about how they felt, but there's no definitive, this is what happened. There's no listing of this is what happened. And it remains a mystery to this day, which is so in alignment with what the intention was, right? And let's not forget, if you divulge in anything that happened in the mysteries, bad things happen.
And that shows how sacred it was.
Right.
So there are a few things that we know, which I think is very interesting. Of course, the kykion was central, the drink, the sacrament. And, you know, some left-brain scientists or researchers want to say, yeah, it was just a wheat drink with a little bit of mint and honey in it. As Wasson explains, it's on the wheat that the ergot grew that sort of made LSD. Okay, regardless of that fact, people who had the mysteries experience in Eleusis were profoundly changed because they had a direct experience of Demeter, of Persephone, of personal rebirth. So that was something that happened. Another thing that archaeologists have surmised from writings is that there was some sort of enactment of the drama of the story of Persephone and Demeter. So, I mean, you can imagine if they had this kind of LSD experience, and maybe by the time they were coming down, you have this enactment with masked performers, you know, showing the sacred drama. You can imagine how impactful that would have been, because it's no longer a vision. Now it's actually something real, and those actors are actually holding and conveying in their energy, in their bodies, in their movements, something extremely profound as well. You know, so there you actually start to have some direct physical interaction with the sacred on another level, on a performance level. And then another area that researchers surmise is that there was the revelation of the holiest of the holies, certain sacred objects that were kind of revealed and displayed to the initiates or the participants. So that in itself must have held some importance to them. They must have been informed as to what they were. I have actually been to Eleusis and to the actual cave where Hades was supposed to have abducted Persephone. And it's very beautiful. It's very evocative. I mean, the buildings are ruins. The Telesterion is a ruin now. But you can only imagine, bringing these sacraments, let's say, from this holy cave and taking it into this big hall. It must have been an absolutely spectacular experience, especially if there was some layer of mind-altering aspect, obviously in a controlled way. It would have been in a controlled way. It wouldn't have been hippie Greeks getting high just for fun.
No, they actually had an outbreak of that where some of the elite in Athens got a hold of some kykion and were holding their own parties at home.
Yes, and that was a huge scandal. That was considered the biggest transgression possible. Yeah.
I think they banished this particular guy. I think they just said, "Oh, what? You're out. See ya. You got to go." Yeah. I mean, they were serious about this, and I just I want to sit in the ceremony so badly. I want to transport myself back there and sit through this elaborate ceremony.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
And I think for me that's, I mean, apart from the fact that we don't have that sort of mystery experience as a, let's say, institution. I mean, I think that's one factor. I mean, okay, yes, of course, there is a rebirth in practices that, you know, psychedelic practices perhaps that could be seen as similar. But the other thing is to actually have a dedicated sacred space that has mythological meaning, where you actually go to have this experience, not only a mind-altering experience, but also to be in a place that has gravitas, that has a history, that has a story, and that is very beautiful. You know, I think all of those different factors together, the fact that it's a venerable tradition, just makes it all that much more powerful. You know, it wasn't something that you just go off for a weekend and have a little mystery experience. You know, it was something you planned for years, and then you go to this incredible place to do it.
I mean, it was a year-long commitment, a year of your life. And the average lifespan, folks, at that time was not what we have today. So each one was precious, and they're dedicating a year solid. Like you say, it's years in preparation, even thinking about it or contemplating you're gonna take a journey.
I mean, the journey could have taken either weeks or months just to get to Athens.
That alone, yeah. And all of the rituals that you had to do beforehand.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating story that we shall continue to dive into. Wanted to just have this initial conversation, which was beautiful, Jacques. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Wonderful to chat.
All of the things that you know about it. And we're gonna get together again, and we are gonna dive even deeper into the mysteries. And yeah, I can't wait for the next.
Anytime. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for this opportunity and for doing the good work that you do.
We're on this journey together, brother. This is amazing. And folks, if you're interested, look at the newmysteries.org. It's the new mysteries. That's what I can say about it.
Thank you, Mark. See you soon.
Thank you.